myself. My name is Loria. I'm going to be moderating this panel, and then we'll just go ahead and go down the line and have everyone introduce themselves real quick.
So I am Paul Bartlett. I am the current GDA Atlanta chapter president, and that's what I do as a moonlighter. And during my day job, I am a mobile applications development for the Georgia Department of Public Safety.
My name is Ben Snowden. Okay, cool. All right, so my name is Ben Snowden. I'm a current student at Kennesaw State University studying game design and development. Currently, I'm just doing that as for my undergrad, and then I'm doing some VR development as a current part-time job on the side.
Hi, my name is Zane Everett. I'm the vice chair for the Atlanta chapter of the International Game Developers Association. But I think what I do that pertains more to this talk is I'm a senior development consultant for Foundry 45. They're a VR business training company. I have also worked in military space doing military training software where we combine motion capture and VR technology at a place called Motion Reality. Prior to that, I worked for 5 years at a company called Cogent Education, making biology software for high school.
Hello everyone, I'm Brannan. I am a senior at KSU, much like Ben, pursuing game design and development as a major. I suppose I have my experience from, I worked for 3 months at Southern Company doing VR AR development for non-traditional game dev purposes. I have a little bit of experience for games for education, and after I graduate, I will be pursuing a non-traditional game dev job as well.
All right, so in case anyone couldn't tell from the descriptions of some of the people here, this panel is on non-traditional game development. So the reason we're having this talk is a lot of people, myself included, the first thing you think of when you think about you're making games, you're game developers, maybe working for someone who's making, Rocket League, or if you want to go for a AAA studio, basically the type of video games that we play. But in a lot of places, in the Atlanta area especially, there are a lot of game development jobs that don't really come to mind. For example, Paul here with the Georgia Department of Public Safety, right? Did I get that right? All right, got it. All right, making games for them. There's a lot of casino companies who make slot games here in Atlanta using Unity, which a lot of us like to use. Just a lot of types of opportunities that you wouldn't even know existed until you found out. So I guess I want to start off with, and this can go to everyone. What would you say, how would you say that you got into, how did you find your first non-traditional game development opportunity? We can just go down the line, Paul.
Okay, yeah. All right, cool.
So for me, I guess my first non-traditional game dev job is technically my current one. And how I got it was when I was in the interview, I literally just pulled up my phone. It's like, yeah, I do mobile development. And I literally showed them a prototype of a game I'd done. And I just showed it off to him. Like, oh, okay, cool. We'll get back with you. And then probably like 2 days later, they gave me the offer for contract work. And was like, okay, I'll take it. So that's how I got my start, was just showing what I did in my spare time doing game development.
All right, so mine was a little bit similar here. I have a couple friends on campus that actually started spamming me with emails about these opportunities. At first, I didn't really look at them at all because I didn't really see them to be, I just didn't really know too much about it, but I kept getting spammed. So eventually I opened one of them up, and it happened to be an application for an internship at Southern Company. After a while, I replied back, and I actually ended up getting an interview set up. And when I went in, kind of likewise here, they just kind of asked me what game development experience do I have, and how would that be able to fit in with these kind of non-traditional game job opportunities that they were providing for me. In that case, I just went down my portfolio list and just kind of showed off different games that kind of showed different mechanics that were kind of similar to what they were kind of looking for. And after that, they liked it and ended up hiring me for 3 months.
So when you say networking was how you got your first job. Yeah. Awesome. I've got something similar. I was a substitute for my professor in master's in my VR class. I did that for a week while he went to a convention, and then towards the end of the semester, he's like, hey, I know this company that they're looking for Unity developers. You should go in and interview. and that was more or less that. And I also have had an interest in education in games for a very long time. I think Age of Empires 2 was kind of where that started.
A man of culture.
Exactly. I like the fact that Age of Empires 2 had this basically wiki section that, while the game wasn't completely historically accurate, they did have information there that you could look up that was within the game, and I thought that was very cool. Thought the idea of, if we can learn 151 Pokemon and all of their types and movesets and how they interact with each other, why can't we learn 118 elements? And I continued that career, and that's where we're at now.
Awesome. So I suppose my first inkling of how game skills can be used for other applications, actually, Zane took the words right out of my mouth. I remember in middle school, my dad asked me, if you know what Pokemon moves are super effective against other moves, why can't you learn what math tools to use or something like that was involved? And haha, that's so funny, Pokemon and math, but it's true. In KSU, in the game development degree track, we have a class called Educational Game Development. And in there, I developed an electricity game where you play as a little robot that runs around on a circuit board, and you place down little circuits and you complete a thing to loop a battery. And I gave this to my younger cousin, who loved it. And that was my first idea of like, oh, this is cool. This is really cool. Similarly to Ben, I also landed the internship at Southern Company, and from there, I was lead VR developer on working on a power plant tour for the HTC Vive, where you walk around and tour a live power plant. The idea is it's employee training, so they don't have to ship employees off to the site and walk them around through this really loud, cramped coal turbine combustion engine, I believe. And then using the Microsoft HoloLens in a later project, I worked on a nuclear reactor prototype. Sweet Tea's not very good for talking.
All right, so next thing I want to bring up is, when you think about what all these people have said, they've worked in simulation, they've worked for the local state government, slot machine companies, casino game companies, etc. So it sounds very different than what we're all used to as far as normal game development jobs. So that kind of leads into my question: how would you say, briefly, that working in these jobs is different than working in your normal games, whether within your local teams or if you've worked for a game dev company? What would you say the differences are?
For me, the big difference is my audience. The stuff I have to develop and create is both for state troopers and professionals, and for the public at wide. So that's the huge difference, is my audience. It could be argued that's for the same, but for the applications that I create, they serve two different purposes.
For me, most differences I've found is probably more likely in the pace of development. Kind of felt like just the development process was changed a little bit since the target audience was a little bit different. Because in your normal games, they were for people that play the games, maybe have a little bit of experience with the games. But in some of these simulations, I found that some of these people using the simulations don't have as much experience sometimes. So it changed the development process and what you would focus on first, is from my experience.
I agree with Paul that really your audience is the biggest difference. And I've worked with several different audiences and user groups, some of them being like high school students, but that's one end user group of that type of software. The other, the teachers. Like, if teachers didn't buy into the fact that the games were teaching the kids, it didn't matter if the kids were having fun, the teachers weren't going to recommend it to their powers of purchasing at their local school districts. Now that I do stuff for business training, like, my audience is, well, one audience is the end users that are going to go through the training process. One end user is the trainer that is typically our subject matter expert, and so if it doesn't fit to their criteria, they're not going to want to have the game purchased. And the other one is purchasing power. People at whatever organization that is contracting the software. You have several different types of audiences that are not necessarily looking just for fun. I think there is a certain fun threshold that has to be there for trainees to enjoy the experience. That's not the primary goal of most of the stakeholders.
It's a lot of research too. When my team got a hold of the nuclear power plant design I mentioned for the AR HoloLens, we got a hold of the CAD model and the most nuclear engineering complicated math spreadsheet looking design of a reactor you have ever seen. It was a mess. So one of my team members specifically spent 3 or 4 full work days analyzing this reactor while the rest of us were putting the CAD file into Blender, cleaning up the 2.5 million polys, and then throwing it into a more usable state in Unity. And then from there, my partner and I collaborated back and forth on labeling the parts, figuring out what these things do, the flow diagram of where the different moving pieces move. So I think if you are working in a more research-based corporate or scientific environment, it's very important that the developer knows exactly how these things work and is not just throwing something into Unity and writing some code.
I would like also make an addition that one of the things that is also vastly different is sometimes the people that you work with are games illiterate, especially with the state government. Yeah, you may be trying to make something, and then they'll look at it like, why are you even trying to do this? And you have to explain to them why you went through the process of what you did, and hopefully convince them, like, oh, okay, maybe.
Okay. So to kind of go slightly in the opposite direction, now that we've talked about what is different, what are some similarities that you notice? What makes it the same as if you were working on your own personal project or working in a normal game development company?
For me, it's also the team I work with. It's kind of like the team I work with is kind of what you expect for working in a game studio. I have artists that create me some art. I do have a QA person that helps me test and debug some of these games and applications that I create for the state. So for me, it's more like the teams that you work with or some of the coworkers. They are some of the same disciplinary skill sets that you will find in traditional game studios, like artists, QA, maybe a producer.
Very much likewise. I would say these kind of had the same development experience there. It kind of felt a little bit like it's a little bit weird because I sit down and I sit with like Unity, my primary program, and I expect to be making a game. However, I am making these simulations out of it. So it feels like it's a very familiar environment I'm in, except I'm just still creating kind of a different output. That's really all I have for it.
There's still a similar level of abstractification out of whatever we're creating. Sometimes a one-to-one simulation really doesn't work. This is a thing that we see from time to time. Had to create basically the abstractification of how nerves work. We weren't getting down to individual, every single molecule. We had to represent a molecular structure and all of this and how it generally worked. But the number of molecules passing across your nerve for the subject matter that we were covering, we reduced, I think, by 1,000 times, but it still got the point across. That molecules were transferring from across one nerve to the other. That level of abstractification it really got the point across, and that was the real goal of the software. Similar deal when working with VR. Sometimes using a one-to-one scale of how control panels work isn't the best way to teach how to use whatever apparatus you're doing. Sometimes you have to have more friendly VR controls that allow you to manipulate these things that are too tiny for current VR controllers or tracking to be able to work with. I mean, that's true for games. That you don't have exact one-to-one controls on everything.
In regards to what is similar between making games and making non-traditional games in a office environment or the work environment, I believe that was the point of the question. I'm going to give the answer that everyone hates, and that is it depends. It depends on where you're working. It depends on the environment. However, I can say in a general sense, how many of you are programmers? Unity developers, Unreal. Okay, cool. You can sit down and start working the job that Ben and I had right now today. In our environment, we were hired on as interns in a small team, and our purpose was more or less research and development. Southern Company buys new toys, brings them to us, and says, figure out how they work. So part of it, as I mentioned, was this combined cycle power plant tour. Day one, they said, here's the power plant tour, put it into VR. Here's our CAD model, make it VR. Day one, I sat down for programming, and it was exactly the same as the games I had been making, as what they were teaching us in class. I was paid money to pull up a Unity tutorial for a game-related purpose and put it into the power plant tour. So while someone had said, pardon me, while the end output, I think it was Ben, while the end output is different, the process to make it is still very much the same.
We actually, right after Brannan left, is essentially when I took my position. VC was there 1 semester earlier, I believe. We actually did start to move into a more development mode instead of research mode, and moved into start creating another actual game for a Southern Company. And I believe we are still on the topic of similarities. Is that correct?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, awesome. So we actually found ourselves spending like the first probably 2 weeks on creating a design document. Just like any other design document you've seen in class, however you've every single way you've been taught it, I spent 8 hours a day for the first 2 weeks building this just really long design document down to every detail that you would do in more any other game. And likewise, it kept being a living document. We kept going through, like I said, we were doing the similarities, making these simulations. But essentially, we would still do these iterations of checking up, say, yes, so this is our, our application, our simulation. It's looking like the design document. Let's change this. Then we go back, reiterate it over and over again. And so that part of the process I felt was really just the same, just keeping that design document a living document throughout your development process.
All right, so moving on, a few of you have been doing a non-traditional game job for years, and a few of you got to do it for a few months. So whether it's 3 months or 3 years, I think we can all agree that even though it has some similarities, it's a very different experience. So the next question I want to ask is there anything you can think of that you learned while working in a non-traditional game job that you don't think you would have learned in a traditional game job, development job? Whoever wants to take it.
Awesome. So I actually do believe I do have a little bit of an answer there. My, I guess, experience would be having to pay attention to more detail on topics in the game that I wouldn't expect I would have to. Part of the development I was on for the game that I was working on at Southern Company, or simulation I was working on at Southern Company, was kind of building these scenarios around electricity, being like the telephone poles and all those kind of the wires going across the street and stuff like that. I would model the substations and kind of stuff like that. But if I miss certain details that I thought, like a person playing this wouldn't actually see the difference, but it was very important for the people that were designing and in charge of this entire project. For example, just like how many transformers I had, like, and where they were placed and stuff like that, I would think to be that important, like in a game or a simulation scenario. But it was very important, like precise to the degree of where I actually had it. So there was just a little bit of differences of what was really important for them and what that looks like in the game versus what the mechanics actually needed to be in the game.
For me, after I was starting thinking about it, it was things I didn't consider were more about how my audience can use my game. Because as I said, or my devices or applications. Because as I said, most of my stuff is public facing, and we have to make sure that all of our applications are within the law. That means like if you can't use our applications while you're driving. And one of the applications that I'm creating is to essentially help troopers notify them when there's like debris on the roads, or if someone hit an animal and you want to get it removed. That was the biggest challenge, and the current challenge I'm still facing is try to tell the public or find ways to let the public know that you can't use this while you're driving, because that is against the law in Georgia and other laws that will be a bind to what we create.
Onboarding is one of the biggest differences between developing games for a gamer audience and developing other applications for people that don't play games. If I can deviate for a second and tell a very short story, a friend of mine that does not play platformers got very scared in Celeste after she left the ground. Because whereas a lot of us gamers know, okay, we jump to try and reach the next platform, In her mind, it was, oh no, I'm in the air, I'm going to fall and get hurt now that I'm in the air. So if you are developing applications for people that don't play games, there are inherent rules that maybe a lot of us as gamers have come to understand, but these users may not know. I'll give you a perfect example. In the virtual reality power plant tour I had mentioned, I had to put in, how can I explain it shortly? Arrows for the laser pointer that you use to move around, because in virtual reality applications, to walk around, you point a thing at a floor and then you let go, and then your player is moved to wherever you were pointing at. That was really hard for a lot of corporate suits to get the hang of. So back to the first word I said, onboarding. For those of you that don't know, that is the process to get someone on board with how your game works or with how your application works. I'll go back to Celeste. The onboarding process was to throw you off a cliff, freeze time, and then tell you how to jump. In the onboarding process for our power plant tour, it was, it required you to move your pointer to a certain location to move forward, and we kind of walked them through that. So you have to do an excellent job in your game or application to tell your users what to do and how to use it.
All right, thank you for that. So next I want to ask.
No, this is the deal. I don't.
You
really
don't
have much
count, so we're
No?
just gonna move on. No,
All right.
please go ahead.
No, this is really gonna. I don't have anything extra to add. These are all great responses, and I really think the biggest challenge is audience.
Says 12 o'clock on the program.
This is 12 o'clock on the program.
12:21. 12:21.
Would you like my seat? All right.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
Fill-in replacement, apparently.
Yep. I was actually asked about 2 minutes before. He was like, "Hey, come to the panel," and I was like, "Okay."
They're chatting out there with people. I said, I got my pill at 1. And Ron's like, no, it's now. Hi, everybody.
All right, so I will backtrack a little bit just so we can catch James up. James, do you want to introduce yourself and describe a little bit of your history with non-traditional game development?
I'll do the first part. So hi, James Simpson.
Hello.
James Simpson, aka Dr. Unity, and owner of Cell Block Studios. I've been using. Okay. Yeah, I know. I've been doing Unity for about 11 years now. I'm one of the first 1,000 people to actually download and use Unity, so I've kind of been doing this for quite some time. And the subject is non-traditional games. We have a subject. What did you say?
Did I say?
Yeah.
I think what I do.
Sure.
The subject is non-traditional game development, James.
One of the things I was talking about was that I do mobile applications and game development for the state of Georgia, and how that is kind of different from traditionally creating a game for the public use to play and have fun with.
Okay. We just getting to you. We've been doing this for 30 minutes. Oh, is this 20 on the clock? Okay. Non-traditional. Non-traditional.
So I think in the minds of a lot of people, a traditional game would be, something like your game, Snarf Quest.
Yeah.
You download it on your computer and you play it at home, or maybe play an online game with some friends. Maybe a good example of what people don't necessarily think of when you talk about video games is, for example, slot games.
Okay.
So if you have any type of insights, so I'll kind of go over a little bit of what we talked about previously, and you can add your thoughts onto it with your own experience, government contracts, casino games, etc. So we talked about what are some of the positives of a non-traditional game dev job and some of the negatives, and also how is it different, but also how is it the same. So basically kind of back and forth on both ends of the spectrum.
Well, one of my first jobs I ever got was building a hurricane tracking program for Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, and that was in the First Desert War. So it was one of those. They said, "You're a programmer, right?" I said, "Yeah." So I got into that, and then we kept trying to do enhance it. So I had the state of Florida and Alabama and the Carolinas. And we had to go track the hurricanes, and then that led me to a job at the same time for palletizing aircraft like C-130s. So they would have a pallet of equipment, and you have to put it in different places.
And that's how I started my programming job. But it was always since I was a child. And I remember distinctly, I was like, I've always wanted to be a game programmer back when the Atari 2600 was out. I knew from the very early point what I wanted to do with my life. So everything I've done has always tried to get me into that position. One of the other jobs that I did was SPSS software. I don't know everyone who takes statistics here. Okay, we got a couple people. Anyway, there's a software program called SPSS, and I learned using statistics how that can actually be part of a game development. As in, you need all these analytics to know what your players are doing. Now, I've learned that over the course of time, but when I was doing statistics, it was always these meetings and modes and all these coin flips and how to get different outcomes. But yet you can have the same data, but you can report it any way you want. That was fascinating, and I enjoyed that. So that was some positive parts about it. The other parts of, I guess, non-traditional jobs would be there's like a language barrier. Like with slots, for example, when people say, "Hey, we're going to work on slot games," people think we put the word "games" out there. With casino games, they're vastly different yet equal to traditional game playing. With slots, you're trying to entice the player, you're trying to get them into the mood, you're trying to get them to put basically more money in, and you reward them with a percentage on the out. That leads you to understand that things are, you're playing with people's core feelings. But yeah, that is part of game playing, and you're still trying to show visual effects to entice the player to put more money in.
The most recent thing that we were talking about right before was, is there anything that you feel you learned while creating non-traditional games that you don't think you would have learned working on a traditional game like SnarfQuest, for example?
I had to learn accounting.
Fair enough.
Yeah, accounting was definitely a lot of the programs I had to write accounting based. I realized, wow, that you had to roll these tables and everything inside your game. So learning accounting got me there. T accounts, yeah.
So do you do your own taxes?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
After this, James has a free tax service set up. Just come to him, bring your W-2s.
No on that.
All right, so next I just want to move on to, has any of your non-traditional game job experiences led you to another experience, whether it be another non-traditional or even to, it got you in with a regular, or what you consider to be a normal or regular game development gig?
I'll let you go first.
My experience working at the corporate level to develop these software applications for users other than traditional gamers has led me to completely now make that my life focus. I enjoyed my time so much there making these things and showing people that have never played games before the joys of being in a virtual world and how amazing it is to put on a headset and see a nuclear reactor in front of you on the floor. That's absolutely what I want to do for the rest of my life. I'm taking that into my career. I'm starting a company with it. I don't know if my answer's too bold, but working in the non-traditional game dev sphere has absolutely changed my outlook on what I want to do.
I've been doing non-traditional games for nearly 8 years, and I've been the vice chair for the International Game Developers Association Atlanta chapter for 2.
I like to build things. I mean, for example, I just did a thing for Atlanta United called the VR Golden Spike VR experience, where you actually get to put a VR headset on and pretend like you're actually in the stadium hitting a golden spike. Is that a game? Yeah. Is it an experience? Yeah. A lot of people enjoy it though, and I like doing that. So,
Kind of to piggyback off of what Brannan said, working for the state and making mobile applications has opened my eyes wide open to the funs and joys of mobile application development, to the point. Oh yeah, grants are good, but unfortunately we work for the state. But my experience doing mobile development for the state has opened some fascinating doors for me, because one of the more excitable projects I'm working on my side is making a mobile game for Bob Carter and his production studio. And that has me really excited. And that can potentially lead me to more open doors if and when it gets done and released.
All right, thank you. So next I want to ask, if someone were to come up to you after this panel and say, hey, I really liked your talk. I want to do non-traditional game dev. What would you say to them? Would you have any advice for them? Would you warn them? What would you say to someone who was interested in getting into non-traditional game dev after hearing this panel?
Make sure you know how to do game development. I mean, one of the sadder things I see when I attend Siege and help run Siege is I see people come with, like, for blunt word, crappy portfolios and say, I want a game job, I want a game job. And developers just reiterate the same spit. Do this, make your portfolio better, do that, and then it just seems like the cycle never ends. More people come with some crappy portfolios and say, I want a job, I want a job. And developers spit the same advice over and over again. So that's my one core thing I would say is make sure you know how to do game development. And I mean, actually have something finished, something to show off, and be something that you kind of are proud of.
Once you've successfully become a game developer, pick a sector to work within. I know I've been all over the place, but I have focused on that for a period of time. But even within that space, it's all been about teaching. I've focused on teaching people some type of content matter. These guys have been working on electrical engineering, like that's a subject. Casinos, public safety. These are individual sectors within other industries that you focus on and become an expert at. Become your game dev, but then focus.
Okay, cool. Speaking from the perspective of the student, the unemployed, maybe someone that already has a gig, but you want to transfer into games or non-traditional games, make prototypes. Have something ready. If you want to work for VR electrical engineering, buy yourself a headset and rig up a little circuit board demo. Have things made, because when you go to apply for these jobs or even start your own company, you already know how to do it. When companies are looking to hire specifically programmers, front-end people, developers, whoever, they want to know that day one you can sit down and start coding. Make prototypes.
I take the shotgun approach with the laser sight. So I like to scatter myself around. I like to just dip my hands in everything, whether it's AR, VR, game development, and even with different types of game development, I do card games, I do point-and-click adventure games, I do first-person shooters, I do third-person shooters, I do simulations. I just do whatever. But my main focus has been on the card and adventure games, which is my focus. So I try to do as much as possible, and I can usually turn things down really quick. Unity is a great platform for prototyping things and getting people's content in front of them. People always want to see something. When you get a contract, they always want, right off the bat, hey, when can you show me something? Tomorrow? Because they're anxious to see something, and of course, once they see it, they change every aspect of it too. But yeah, I would have. You have to have an understanding, you have to have a foundation, and you have to be able to show that you can actually produce results.
Okay, so before we move on to audience questions, does anyone have any last remarks that they want to say? It doesn't have to be advice, it could just be a general statement, anything about non-traditional game development.
Unity is very big on non-traditional game development. If you guys would like to see Unity come out for a developer day in 2020, many of your booklets have an insert in it that has a link to fill out a survey. That survey will be used to take a business plan to Unity to convince them to come out to Atlanta for a developer day next year.
I would also say don't be afraid to apply for a job that may not seem like it's in the game design sector or in doing game development, because you never know what your project could turn out to be. That was certainly the case when I took this job for the public safety, because I originally was signed on to just do mobile applications, but eventually there was a project that's like, maybe I threw the idea, maybe it would be better as a game, and they kind of liked the idea. So I would argue, don't be afraid to try to hunt down just game studio jobs. You never know what project or what your company that you're looking to get hired by can do.
All right. Anything else? All right. So I guess we'll move on now. Does anyone in the audience have a question they would like to ask the panel?
So this is a question for Brannan. You were mentioning this revelation that enabled your new vision to be working in non-traditional VR development after college. I was wondering if you could go into more depth on that, just for inspiration purposes for other people that might want to also do this, like more specifics of what exactly you want to do in the future.
Yeah, sure. Let's see. Let me see if I can only stick to the important details here. I will essentially be starting a company that will be doing contract work solutions for the corporate level. If there's anything I've learned during my time at Southern Company, is that the virtual reality, augmented reality space, it is great for the consumer, it's great for the gamer, but it is excellent for the corporate sphere. So I plan to be going to the biggest companies we can find, Mitsubishi, Audi, CDC, whoever needs it, and creating virtual reality solutions, whether that be employee safety training or audience demos or sorry, I had something in my head, pardon me. Or car prototypes, anything collaborative for whatever these corporate solutions need, that's what they will come to us for. So for my non-traditional game development work, it will be providing solutions to what these companies need to improve on. That was really scatterbrained, but I hope it got the point across. I'm sorry.
No, it is good. That is a big industry right now. Just this whole training space for businesses. Yeah, there's a ton of money in it right now, and it's global. Just at Unite Singapore, and there were 2 games on show there. The rest of it was VR business training applications.
I'd like to add another little bit, pardon me. Another reason why the corporate sphere is so interesting for VR AR stuff is that we're on the cusp of this technology right now. When you hear cutting edge tech, that's this. That's right where we are. And I say that because VR is not a household name yet. It will be soon, within 10 years. But it is not right now, which means it is interesting to the general public, but it is very interesting to businesses, which is why if you are interested in doing this, that is not a bad place to start looking. Thank you.
Any other audience questions?
Hey, how's it going, guys?
Hi.
Drew Martin. Okay, so you guys had it seemed like you guys were recommending almost like an old school approach to getting being successful in the field by approaching companies that are already successful or have job opportunities. Would you recommend possibly pursuing a more abstract or other opportunity, kind of maybe starting your own business as opposed to depending on the kindness of strangers?
Hell yeah.
Some more detail on what you mean by abstract actually would be better. Just, you said, would you be interested in pursuing a more abstract mean?
I mean, anything from starting your own company to finding maybe a startup company that's interested in your product, finding finding a startup company that you could offer a service to. I mean, anything
I mean, I think essentially what you're getting at is it's B2B. So much of non-traditional gaming is B2B. I think casino games are a slight exception there, but that may not. There's still some B2B aspects to it, whether you're getting with actual slot machine companies if you're going to program the stuff for it. But education, that's the government is a business, right? So whatever product that you're creating, which is Cogent Education, started from the ground up as a small startup business, saying we wanted to revolutionize how education worked in the United States. Our clientele was still U.S. government entities. We created the product on our own. That was how we went forward. This is Foundry 45, where I work for now. But it's B2B. Business to business. So one business creates a product and sells it to another business for sale. And that's really, if you're making training simulations or visualizations of, say, construction or engineering, you're doing that for someone like, I don't know, Siemens or Coca-Cola or Home Depot, or if it's customer service, like maybe Chick-fil-A. Like this is, yeah, the majority of this is B2B.
Yes. Yes. It is. It is easier than you think it is to start a business. Forgive me, I assume that you haven't done that, but it is easier than you think it is. It is difficult to do it, but you can go online right now and register a LLC in the next like 3 days. Right now, the
Yeah.
right now the current economic climate is really good for starting small businesses. It's also very healthy in Georgia. There are lots of online tools that can help you. I would absolutely encourage doing it because not only is it fun, it's cool, but it also increases the Atlanta game dev sphere. So I would absolutely recommend it. Pull some friends, get a business plan, find some investors, get yourself your 200 grand, and start working.
And a lawyer.
And a lawyer.
Yeah, with casinos, it is kind of business to business because you're not selling you're not putting a slot game in the person's house. You're putting it in a casino. So you're actually dealing with the casino. And it's the casino's responsibility to bring people in to play the game. So it is a business to business, but at the same time, your product needs to shine among all the other 15 to 2,500 cabinets that are in that space. Yeah, and also do something you want to do. Yeah, that's the most important advice I think all of us up here can give you. Is if you want to do, we want to do something you want to do. Otherwise, you'll never be very good at it.
That's kind of why I said pick your specialty.
Yep. Pick what you want to do and then find investors that are interested in that.
Do we have another audience question?
What skills would you recommend focusing on if we wanted to get into non-traditional game development jobs, like development skills, design skills, anything outside of that sphere as well?
For me, I ask you, what do you want to do? Are you trying to be a programmer, artist, etc.? Because all these fields can be applied to non-traditional gaming. So if you're trying to be a programmer, I would say try to find an engine or a language that you think is going to be applicable to what you want to do, and as we will always say, be an expert in it. Make sure you know how to do it. Churn stuff out. Make prototypes.
Besides your traditional development careers, such as artist or programmer or audio, like those are all viable careers. There's also, like, I guess this is becoming more true for traditional games as well. Like, there's more marketing jobs out there because, well, to be able to market to other businesses, you need to have someone that is skilled at doing so. There are also subject matter experts, which I don't think is quite as large in traditional games. I mean, it depends on the subject matter of the game, but I don't think it's quite as big as a dedicated subject matter expert role at a particular company. So that's not even development. That's you went and got a master's or a PhD at something else at university. Those are other types of careers that are also available for non-traditional games.
People skills.
Network.
Well,
Networking.
sort of.
Well, yes.
It's back to what I was saying about onboarding. If you tell any one of us to press L3, most of us know what that means. If you tell a boomer working in a cubicle to press L3, chances are they might not quite know what that means because L3 is not labeled on the controller. So if you spend a little bit of time figuring out how people tick and understanding the best ways to communicate a controller or a game system to people that don't know how to do this, I think that's incredibly important to start designing your non-traditional games around.
Atlanta is a hub for advertising companies. You really, I could probably throw a tennis ball. Yeah. I mean, really, you can. If you say that you work for an advertising agency and if you're looking for work, you will have so much work you have to start refusing people. I mean, Home Depot, Equifax, SCAD. I mean, all these different places are constantly looking for people to build essentially ads, and they're not really games per se. They're called advert games. Cartoon Network, another thing. You get on their studio list. You're constantly given work. You have to refuse most of it. So Atlanta is huge for advertising.
that falls under a term of games adjacency.
I believe we have time for one or two more questions.
Please, we love questions.
Hey guys.
Hey.
Okay, so I'm more of a technical artist by my degree title. So where would I fit in any kind of environment? Like, would I be more of a modeler? Would I be more of a programmer? I'm kind of confused by what a technical artist is.
So
You are the most important
Yeah.
person in the company.
Yeah.
I'm not being
Well,
funny.
that's real close to true.
Yeah. So, for example, I used to work for a company called MySpace. Don't worry about it. Anyway. Yeah. It's like Facebook. So I wrote the music player for MySpace, and I did a lot of the work on the music player for MySpace. And one of the things that we had to do was I had to interact with artists, okay? And I would tell artists to give me something the power of 2. And I swear this is a true story. I said, hey, look, I'm having to make this modification. Could you give me something the power of 2? So he gave it to me 2,000 by 2,000. I was like, what am I supposed to do with this? Okay, there was just a certain language or concepts that they don't understand. Like making things 2048 or 512 or 1024. And so programmers sometimes have difficulty understanding what artists want to do. They want to do multiple layers. It's like, well, I need a rasterized PNG. And it's like, wait, what? So you, as a technical artist, bridge the gap between an artist and a programmer. And without that, they're doing nothing but spinning wheels or cutting up assets. So an artist, a contractor artist may break something up, do a PSD of something, okay? Give it to you. It's your job to cut it up so the programmers can use it in whatever engine they're using. And that is by hands down, hands forward?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's hands down the most important part of the company.
Other types of tasks that a technical artist would do, and you're talking about the direct translation, that's important. Depending on how you focus as a technical artist, some people can lean more towards the art side, other people can lean more towards the programming side, but you are this bridge. Those that lean more towards the programming side often do things like create the tools that artists use to create the art, which is a really fun role to have. So for whatever reason, your game or software requires you to make tons of trees that are different. Well, you're going to be someone that takes in different assets that the artists have created and turns around either this procedural tool or randomly generated, or having more of a design element that, okay, the artist made a thing and you made a thing, and now those two things work together, and their job is now 10 times faster because of you. This is one of the roles of a technical artist. Optimization.
Have you worked with engines, games engines, anything in your? Sure. You know the little 3D marker with the red arrow and the green arrow and it was a technical artist that probably helped make that. Gizmos, the speed tree engines. If you imagine the small sphere, right, of technical art, there's a lot of tiny little dots that you can do inside of that sphere. So while I can't speak too much to working with the technical artist or knowing exactly what they do, I will admit to that, you can look into a lot of different possibilities within that sphere of what you're studying. It is a lot less closed than you might think it is.
Do we have one final question? Ask one of them what their social security number is.
Anything.
All right. Well then, we'll bring it into the panel. Once again, this is non-traditional game development jobs, and I just want to say thank you to our panelists, Paul, James, Zane, and Brannan, and also Ben.